The world bracing for Donald Trump's Liberation Day. The U.S. president will be back on the podium in just a few hours to announce new reciprocal tariffs. To discuss those White House tariffs, we're joined by Alex Capri. He's senior lecturer at NUS Business School, speaking to us from Washington. Mr. Capri, in just a few hours, we will get that announcement in the Rose Garden in the White House. If the casualty in all these threats of tariffs is the greatest casualty is, in fact, confidence as well as certainty, whatever we hear in that announcement, we should, in principle, be in a better place in 12 hours, however punishing those tariffs might be, because we will be more certain.
Well, I'm not sure we're going to be more certain. I think what we need to be considering and looking out for is whether or not this administration announces sort of universal across-the-board tariffs, maybe ranging from 10 to 20% on everyone, basically, in addition to the tariffs that have already been announced, for example, on automotive products and automobiles, steel, aluminum. Or will this administration move towards reciprocal tariffs, whereby they single out individual countries around the world based on the tariff rate that they are applying against U.S. goods, and they try and make up the delta, the difference, right? So many countries around the world have VAT and GST on imports, which the U.S. doesn't have, and that essentially makes their tariff rates on the whole higher than U.S. tariff rates. It could also be that we hear that the U.S. will put countries into groupings, right? Different groupings based on how they've been perceived to be behaving. So really, it's hard to say what we're going to hear today.
Groupings might, in fact, be simplifying. U.S. trade shaped by tariffs on more than 6,000 products based on agreements with more than 200 countries, regions, and trade associations. It's just a press conference in the Rose Garden. We are not going to be seeing the level of detail we would need if you're going to be negotiating line by line every tariff on every product with every country if we do not get blanket tariffs. So we are not going to get any clarity, in fact, are we?
That's right. I think the uncertainty that has agitated markets, I think the lack of clarity that has existed, the announcements one day and then the reversal on certain of those actions the next day, I think that is part and parcel to how this U.S. president operates, and sort of the arbitrary kind of ad hoc nature of how things are being done. And that's not helpful to markets. So I think if we don't see some good sort of consistent application of tariffs, maybe an explanation as to how this is going to progress over the coming months, I would expect to see a lot more uncertainty and a lot of negative reaction, I think, around supply chains and trade.
So that would be on execution of any potential tariffs. But in terms of rationale, you mentioned, for example, the VAT, which the U.S. does not impose. And that means in terms of effective duties, that the U.S., in fact, has one of the lowest import duties compared to any other major country. So when Mr. Trump says, we are just asking for fairness, we are just playing fair, we want others to play fair with us, he is, in fact, speaking the truth.
Well, look, his rationale for many decades has been that the U.S. has gotten a raw deal. You know, its major trading partners, including its closest allies, have been charging more in tariffs, as you mentioned, because of things like VAT and GST on imports. But there's a wider rationale that applies here to the MAGA concept, right? The Make America Great Again concept. And that is, by imposing these tariffs, whether they're reciprocal or universal, the U.S. stands to collect a lot of revenue, right? And this is revenue that could be used to justify or to underwrite some of the tax cuts that this administration is proposing, and to use that revenue essentially to promote its own partisan brand of politics, right? So I think that's very interesting. And the other is to by placing these tariffs on inbound goods to the United States, the rationale here is to encourage companies around the world and investors to invest more in the United States in manufacturing, in supply chains, and to reshore, if you will, a lot of the supply chains that have moved offshore. So these are all parts of the rationale behind this tariff game that we're looking at.
So the reshoring American jobs and American manufacture, and as well as raising revenue, these are laudable. The concern is that the economic distortion that would accompany big tariffs that would generate these sorts of returns, that is the concern. You could do this, for example, with a large tax base, with a low tax rate revenue, and you could raise the same amount of revenue without the level of distortion, as well as uncertainty and damage to relations with allies. For you, what's the greatest casualty of potential tariffs? Final question.
Yeah, look, I think the first thing is it's very difficult to predict what level of retaliation the U.S. will face from other countries, right? So that's a net negative effect, right? That means that additional U.S. exports are now going to be targeted and are being targeted, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's technology, whether it's civil aircraft. Certainly it's going to impact sales of U.S. military hardware around the world, sort of as part of this backlash. So I think the retaliatory effects could be considerate, and of course then the casualty is the global economy, right? So we could see a contraction of growth in the global economy. The other is that for the U.S. in particular, that its major trading partners are going to readjust, and they're going to look to buy and sell amongst other countries, right, within other types of blocks and groupings, which means that the U.S. exporting base could in fact see its revenues and its trading partners looking to other sources, right? So I think the trade diversion element is significant, particularly if you consider that the U.S. is the world's largest economy, but it only accounts for about 13 or 14% of all global trade, right? So I think many of its trading partners over the next few years, they're going to be looking for alternatives, and this of course could have a long-term impact on the U.S. economy.
Oh, thanks, Alex Capri, senior lecturer at the NUS Business School. See what happens from those tariffs in just a few hours.